Okay, good, because it's not really a research talk, so we have more industry people here. Hopefully that's a good thing. It is evidence-based, of course, but I'm going to be actually trying to give you some tools and strategies that you can use to help build a high-performing team. Okay, so I had to show you, what I'm missing out on in Calgary. So on the left-hand side, typical Calgary commute. Lots of snow, as you can imagine. On the right-hand side is just outside my gym, so it gets very depressing. It's difficult. I just got these pictures last week, so I decided I had to show them because my wife and I, we were able to go up north to the sand dunes and experience dunes in the warmth. This is what we do in Canada. This is my sister's family, so my brother-in-law and my nieces. And, it's probably minus 30 degrees, so they're trying to make the most of it. But, yeah, it's better here. The red dot is where this picture was taken. Calgary, where I'm at, is about a couple of hours south of that, so it's actually a little bit warmer. But this has been my life with my wife here in Perth. Unbelievable place. On Scarborough Beach is where we always stay. And this is where I get every morning a workout and a run. And I mean, there's just no comparison, right? So people ask me to describe Perth. What's it like in Perth? I actually had a graduate student interviewing for an academic job here, and I just wrote back one word: paradise. And I still feel that way after 3 trips. So I specialize in my lab on building high-performance teamwork. I'm an industrial organizational psychologist, so I'm housed in the Department of Psychology. In industrial organizational psychology, we take principles from psychology and translate them into things that organizations can use to improve the quality of the work being done, the efficiency of the organizations, but make people happy and satisfied in their work. I just happen to specialize in teamwork. And I created the Individual and Team Performance Lab in 2011 when I started at the University of Calgary. I've been there ever since. I usually have about 15 people from undergraduate students doing honors theses and research assistantships to master's students, PhDs, and postdoctoral fellows. And then my software person is Zaw in that other picture, and he runs something called ITPmetrics.com, which is a 100% free evidence-based assessment and feedback tool for teamwork. So if you want to mark that down, it's ITPmetrics.com. It's as good or better than any assessment you can get out there, and I've worked in firms, so I know how to create them, but it's free and it's grant-funded, and it's my way of trying to translate research dollars into something that the community can actually benefit from. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about the opportunity of teamwork. Let's think about the potential advantages of teams. You could get increased engagement because you're working with other people, as well as accountability. People are depending on you. You can get people to start identifying with the team. They see the team as part of themselves. And then there's the felt importance and meaningfulness of the work because you can do more when you're working on a team. The feeling of collaboration, it's been used a lot in error reduction in high reliability organizations like healthcare or aviation, where errors or lack of errors is actually performance. And it's important in creativity, innovation, and disruption. A lot of startups, for example, will be team-based. So great, seems like an excellent no-brainer. But if you expect to do that just by sort of putting people in a room and calling them a team and walking away, you're way off, and it probably will end badly. So we want to take advantage of these opportunities, but it's not entirely easy to do. Whoops, that's not planned. So also, why teamwork? The complexity of modern problems in organizations, the challenges that we face in the world, the challenges that humanity faces at this point are just too complex to deal with one person. So VUCA is volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous environments. The volume of work is really too great. The speed that we need work to be done at in order for organizations to stay competitive needs teams. And I mentioned innovation and error reduction. There's all kinds of critical applications, really, to all of humanity. And the journey to Mars, for example, we are going to Mars, hopefully, as a species. And some people think we should be a multi-planet species. And NASA's planning to go in the 2030s. It will be a 4-person team, most likely. It will be 1 American, 1 Russian, and we don't know about the other 2. And how do we make this team succeed, especially because the journey itself is a 7-month journey, depending on orbits and timing. How do we make sure they live in a tiny capsule and don't kill each other in those 7 months and actually get there? So there's all kinds of really exciting things going on. A lot of industrial organizational psychologists are working on that. I had the chance to go to the Buzz Aldrin Space Institute and work with other social scientists on potential solutions to that. Some of the trends in teamwork. So I looked at different industry reports. KPMG, is KPMG the big consulting firm here? Yeah. So they said people collaborating with each other to achieve common business objectives is a fundamental prerequisite to creating optimization. Ernst & Young's report said diversity improves both financial performance and reputation, calling for interdisciplinary teams. Deloitte said 45% are restructuring around teams in 2016. The app, Microsoft Teams, the social networking kind of platform for collaborating and organizing work, they have at least 329,000 teams using them, and that's just the one app. Some of the firms that I've worked with, so Alberta is really a lot like Western Australia. It's energy-driven economy, and then finance would be second. So I worked with a company there called Enbridge, and they had a whole strategic pillar around enabling energized teams. And from the very top, that was one of their plans to get a competitive advantage. And then NMAX as well, that's the utility in Alberta. We work together to create a roadmap to team effectiveness because their talent management strategy right now will be to build high-performance teams. In the past, it has been much more geared toward leader development, and I think we're finally getting to the point where we recognize that it has to be we have to build high-performance teams ultimately, and not all those leadership development strategies and investments were actually trickling down to the teams. And so we've already been engaging with Western Power here and the ITP Lab ecosystem. They're doing some really cool things with agile teamwork and cross-functional teams to solve organizational problems. Google decided in 2014 to do a massive study going around finding out what makes their teams tick. You might have read about this, Project Aristotle. Something like 145 different teams, probably mostly software development teams, but other types of teams too. And what do you think the one factor was that differentiated effective teams from ineffective teams? Huge Financial Times article, takes forever to read. It boils down to this one thing. Well, it was something that in 1999, Amy Edmondson out of Harvard University had already discovered. It's too bad it took 15 years for Google to, whatever Google does is law, basically, right? So now it's out there. But she came up with the concept of psychological safety, an environment that is free for interpersonal risk-taking, where people feel comfortable speaking up, sharing different points of view, playing devil's advocate, calling people out. It's a safe and comfortable environment. So it's not exactly rocket science, but that is literally what Google came to. And we know this from the evidence that it's the case as well. It just took 15 years to get into the mainstream public. So it's really important to understand what high-performance teamwork is, because if you're trying to achieve that, you need to be focused on what it is. Most people would get the first one, that it is about delivering quality output to the stakeholders of the team. Clearly that has to happen. And that's what leaders are pretty much solely focused on, in my experience. J.R. Hackman, also out of Harvard, And this is what actually got me hooked on industrial organizational psychology, was I picked up this book one summer, Leading Teams, Setting the Stage for Great Performances. It's 2002. Everything in it is just as relevant today. I mean, it's based on 4 decades of his research and other research on high-performance teamwork. You also need to make sure that the team continues to be viable over time, or even becomes more capable over time as a result of it working together. And a lot of the teams that I've been called in to work with, they actually are performing well for the first criterion. They're getting the work done. They're experts. They're very capable people. The problem is the way that that's happening is not sustainable and not healthy, and people are very stressed out and upset. So they're not meeting the second criterion. And you can see that that would be a problem. And the third one is that the individual team members learn and grow and are satisfied and have needs met as a result of being on the team. So those are 3 different things that we have to think about when we're trying to cultivate high-performance teamwork. How are we doing? Another Harvard study, so hopefully you like Harvard. I don't know why the teams researchers are coming out of there, but they are, by a lady named Wageman, found that only 1 in 5 management teams were performing at an outstanding level, and nearly half of them were fairly dysfunctional. And that was not that long ago that survey was done. But in the 80s, that J.R. Hackman, who I already mentioned, set out to write a book about teams that work. So he had different students in his lab tracking, basically interviewing and hanging out with all kinds of different teams, like orchestras even, like aviation crews, sports teams, management teams, project teams. Each team gets a chapter in that book, but it was going to be about groups that work, so they could say, here's what you should do. And then they realized that so many of those groups weren't functional at all. And so he renamed the book, and those that don't. So this isn't actually news that groups aren't doing well. It might be to you. In my own assessment platform, I have an assessment dedicated to diagnosing the health of the team on a number of different dimensions. I've just averaged across those dimensions in this case and plotted, and this was a while ago, so it's not a big sample at this point, but the team's ratings, or the team's perception of how well things are going in the team, against the leader's perception of how well things are going in the team. In the vein of performance, what you can see is actually there's only 5 teams getting above a 4 out of 5 on the 5-point scale. It's actually a 1 to 5-point scale. Only 5 teams exceed that. That works out to about 20% of these teams. So we could call those probably exceptional teams because they're on the far right. Most of the teams are between 3 and 4. And just so you know, 3, the blue dot in the bottom corner, that was the first team I ever debriefed. And I wasn't really formally trained in facilitation. And I didn't know that 3 was like the worst score. And people were crying. So just to give you an anchor point, that's how bad 3 is. And most teams, the top end tends to be around 4. So there's a whole lot of untapped opportunity and potential there. The other observation is that most of the dots are above this line. So what does that mean? The leaders seem to have an inflated view of how healthy the team is. So probably criterion 2 and 3, the leaders are a little bit out to lunch. So if you're a leader, I would have you think about, are you in touch with the sort of relationship side, the day-to-day side of what it's like to be in your team? Is that a good place to be? The one, I don't think this one, there's no laser, but some of those ones near the top are particularly alarming. That leader told me everything was fantastic and no cause for concern whatsoever. And the team has a much lower rating. So it's kind of scary, given that leaders are making the decisions and calling the shots. Then I saw yesterday, I think the Gallup 2020 came in. This is US, but in any case, the percent engagement seems to be going up. So this goes back to 2000. Lately, it's been going up about 1 percentage point per year to the point where our workforce, the US workforce, I guess, is 35% engaged. On the other hand, if your team was 35% engaged, would you feel good about that? If I have 35% engagement in this room, I'm gonna be unhappy. I remember that more than a third of workers are searching actively or casually for a job, and that they tend to quit bosses, not jobs. So another statistic, it was so weird, I got that one yesterday and this one today, was that 70% of variance in employee engagement can be attributed to their immediate supervisor and what they do and their behaviors. So it won't matter what you do at the strategic level if your frontline leaders are not trained to create healthy teams. So the team matters. 50% are more motivated by team success than the company's success or their individual success. And 43% feel they have a large personal impact on their primary team's mission versus the company's mission. All right, so there's a real opportunity to enhance organizational effectiveness if you can get those teams working well. And that's the point of this slide, which I'm not going to go into in much detail. But if teams are the engines that are doing the work of the organization, and they're 20% to 35% healthy, then you're not going to get a very good return on your investment if you're putting resources into those teams, the organizational inputs, they're doing work, and then trying to create more value than the resources that they use. And that won't be happening very well if people aren't engaged and if teams aren't healthy. And they need to be doing this in the happy face is about doing it in a satisfying and viable way. Right? It's not all about efficiency. All right. I want to ask you a couple questions. I'll ask you 2 questions. Pop quiz about teamwork. So the first one's an easy one, I think. What is the ideal team size? Would you say A, smaller the better, B, bigger the better, or C, doesn't matter, it's irrelevant? So how many people say A, smaller the better? Pardon? Smaller the better, just as a general principle, not necessarily 3 is the best no matter what you're doing, but as a general principle. So B, bigger is better? And C, doesn't matter? Okay, playing it safe, I get it. The general rule of thumb is you want to lean towards smaller is better. If you have too much role overlap, for example, you're going to have reduced accountability, and then we get into the sort of social loafing and free rider potential issues. So the general rule of thumb, smaller the better. All right, how about, we'll do 3. What's better? Do you want to, A, attract the best fit for the team? So when you're selecting people into the team, do you want to attract the person with the best fit? Or B, create the most diverse team? Or C, maximize both? Are you laughing because it's too easy? Or A, attract the best fit for your team? Okay, some people, B, create the most diverse team. Some people, C, maximize both. That's what I would try to do. Yeah, maximize both. All right, the last one's going to feed into the next part of the talk. All right, so what's more effective? Do you want to set conditions for success early in the team's life cycle in terms of creating the structures and the scaffolding, the conditions that will allow the team to succeed? B, do you you want to focus on leading and coaching the team through the work as they do it. Or C, it depends. So A, set the conditions for success early on. B, sorry, how many? Okay. B, lead and coach the team through the work. That's what my wife chose this morning. C, it depends. Yeah. Well, there's multiple ways of approaching that one, but the best thing you can do would be to put the conditions in place that support high-performance teamwork and provide the structures and the scaffolding and the norms and almost like the infrastructure so that you can succeed. And then, if you can lead them well through the work, you will get an incremental boost from that. But if they don't have a supportive team structure around them in the first place, if the organization is designed in such a way, or the team's designed so that, it's not conducive to teamwork, then not much leadership activity will make a difference. And there's pretty clear evidence for that. Okay. All right, so what are some of those things in terms of conditions that you can do? So the idea is if you put the conditions into place, get out of their way, but probably not. Lead them, but still, imagine you've got the best experts you can have in the room to do a particular task. You give them favorable conditions. You don't have to do a lot more after that. When we go through some of this, it's a little bit content heavy, sorry, but think about making a difference starting tomorrow. So if you're a leader or you're on a team, try to think of 1 or 2 or 3 things you could just take back. Not the whole thing, probably be too much, but there's a few things in here that will resonate with you, I'm sure. Focus on that. And so part of this is back to that roadmap concept I mentioned before. So a lot of leaders want to get right into the task. Here's our job, and how are we going to do it? What I would suggest, and what the literature would suggest, would be to start thinking about building a team identity. So you want to get people to start thinking about the needs and the values and the objectives of the team. You want to get people excited about the team's mission and to sort of start rallying together. This isn't rah, 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 but it's about building a strong collective identity. And I'm not going to go into all the details about the roadmap, but you need to convey a very clear direction and purpose. We're going to come back actually to how to do that one later, but they have to understand, why is this team here? Why does this work need to be done? Not just because the company needs it done. That's not very inspiring. Acquaintanceship. You need people to actually get to know each other. Maybe something personal. We are going to be working together in an interdependent fashion. We need to actually, we're human beings, we're not robots. And a lot of times teams don't do that. You need to understand the context that the team lives in. So where do you fit in terms of aligning with the organization's mission and vision? Who are the critical stakeholders? Who are you counting on for resources and support? And then you want to build a team climate, whatever that team climate needs to be for your team to be successful. If it's one where the norms are supportive of open information sharing and psychological safety, and whatever you think that it should be, and whatever the team thinks it should be, they should participate in that. You start thinking about the team climate and describing how it should look. So in working with some teams, I took a couple of quotes from actual teams doing this well and teams failing at it. So in a good team, the key point is, this person said, everyone in the team helps each other to grow and succeed together. The failure of one person in this team is a failure of the whole team. So that's a team identity. That's a strong team identity, because it's about the team rather than individuals. The other one, we started out acknowledging that we were a powerhouse team and that we were fortunate to have the expertise to make this happen. We have the top guns. Now, though, it appears we're somewhat backpedaling or wavering, unsure of what we've been doing. So the direction and purpose isn't clear. This is a not-for-profit, and they had a new leader who was very young compared to the people who were that he was leading, and he didn't have very clear direction at all. So this makes sense. Okay, so if you can develop a strong team identity, then you can start thinking about a task identity. So let's think about getting clear understanding and consensus around what will be the metrics that we'll use to define team performance. And the nice thing about having something that you can count or work toward as a fairly objective measure is you can start tracking progress. And when you get progress, people get motivated. When it's unclear if any progress is being made, why would people keep driving really hard for you? Doesn't really make sense. There should be a team strategy, so the overall way that you're going to approach achieving high performance. You need to then know the task requirements to do it, and then roles. Who's going to be taking care of what tasks? And finally, one that gets forgotten is the task interdependencies, critical interdependencies. So if I don't show up one day or for a week, does that mean none of that service can be performed, or is somebody able to jump in? Who's relying on me, and that kind of thing. So a bad example, a team struggling with this, it feels like we've got to be looking at self-care of our team and find a way to deliberately focus on the victories and create our own metrics we can use to keep our team positive and seeing value. So they had some metrics that were imposed on them, but this person is also saying we should have some of our own, ones that resonate with us and we care about. And a good team, this was an engineering team in oil and gas. Not surprisingly, it's all about process maturity. So to really achieve the full potential of the team, we took the time to develop and improve processes and performance metrics, which allowed us to be more effective in executing our projects and allow new members to get started quicker, which makes a lot of sense. But oftentimes, we don't develop those processes super clearly and document them, and it's like recreating the wheel every time. It's really inefficient, right? And the last one is the actual execution. If you've got a strong team identity and they understand the task work, now it's about monitoring, diagnosing, and enhancing them actually doing the work. And so as a leader, you want to be keeping your eye on the climate, because when work gets intense, the climate tends to deteriorate. You want to keep an eye on their coordination, collaboration, the workflow, the handoffs, that kind of thing. That's work execution. When problems come up, resist the urge to just do what you think is right and hopefully have a collaborative approach to solving the problem, because again, remember, you should have experts on your team who probably know at least as much, if not more, than you do about a lot of these things. And people get really excited about solving problems collaboratively. There should be continuous feedback, and if you can do all of this, people are going to be empowered. Your team's going to be empowered because they kind of feel in charge of figuring out how are we going to get to the destination. And some of the best teams I've worked with are like innovation teams, these cross-functional ones that come together to solve an important problem. Oftentimes they volunteered. They want to be there. It's entirely unstructured. They have a lot of freedom, but that's not the way we normally organize teamwork. So a good description of this, basically, it often seems like our input on this team isn't valued, and that's the only thing we can discuss. The only thing we can discuss is why we can or cannot follow a directive. Whereas I really like this one. We're all able to bounce ideas off one another in an open environment. There's excellent team support in stressful situations, and we work to find resolutions to problems together. The team I work with is generally the reason why I enjoy my job and have stayed in this position for 3 years. So, all right. So that's a lot. Let me step back for a second. We're going to talk about direction, purpose, trust, and healthy disagreement in a minute. So healthy disagreement is constructive debate in the team, having experts come together and share very divergent perspectives to ultimately create something new. You know, direction, purpose, and trust. My assessment actually does measure these and other things. These tend to be the most challenging. And my question to you is going to be, which one of these things do you think teams almost always have the lowest score on? Would it be direction and purpose, trust, or healthy disagreement? So how many people think direction and purpose teams usually suffer the most with? Just a few of you there? Okay. How about trust? Whoa, okay. And what about healthy disagreement? Yeah, it is healthy disagreement, and that was what the bulk of people said. I didn't know if you would get that one. That's interesting to me. The thing is, they're all linked, right? You need direction and purpose to have healthy disagreement, and you need trust to have healthy disagreement. And no surprise, a lot of teams don't have that. I happen to do my dissertation on conflict and conflict management, and that's what I'm talking about. And that is where the insights and the innovation comes from. So it's really interesting. Okay, so I think I have 15 more minutes. Yeah, that's this 17. Yes. They told me 7:02. I'm not kidding. So I practiced. So how do you set a direction and purpose? Could you articulate the direction and purpose of your team right now if you had to? Could you do it in a 30-second elevator ride to someone in a way that would get them excited about what your team does? There's no one way, and I think creativity is the best thing to do. I found this, which I like. It's the intersection of what your team does, the manner in which it's done, or how, and why you do it. Why seems the most interesting to me, but I asked somebody, and theirs was evaluate healthcare interventions. That's what the team does. By using the systematic generation of evidence, that's how. And in order to save lives, and that's why. All right? It's color-coded even. Another one is a computer for everyone. A computer for everyone. So it doesn't follow the rules here, and I don't think there should be rules. Do you know who said the computer for everyone? Yeah, the next is a bit of a giveaway. Steve Jobs, of course, launched Next after getting ousted from his own company, which they then bought back from him later for a lot of money. And it's still at the heart of the operating system of the OS X. So he also famously said, in trying to recruit an executive from Pepsi, do you want to sell sugar water for the rest of your life or come change the world with me? Whatever. Here's how I did it with my lab, and it's worked very well for both orienting people to what we do, selecting people into the lab, screening people, having people select out, and for communicating to industry what we're all about. So you can do kind of a mini team charter, and these don't have to be exhaustive activities. It's not that difficult to do, but it becomes very useful. So the mission's growing your people and ours. So using knowledge that we have where we can contribute in the community and within the university, we will do that in a service orientation in order to grow your people, but then also grow our own, because we're getting all these cool experiences like me being here right now and my students working with teams and getting something on their resume so they can get a job. So that's what we do. Where we're going in our vision would be a world in which all teams and team members reach their full potential. So we don't do anything that doesn't involve high-performance teamwork in some way. If I can't link it to that, no matter how exciting the opportunity, and it's hard sometimes, I just have to say no. I might have the skill set, or we might have the capabilities in the lab, we just can't do it. And so many teams are pulled in way too many directions, because there's no clear direction and purpose, and then there's no discipline in adhering to it. Goals to influence 1 million people in the next 5 years. That's what we want to achieve. That's one of the things we want to achieve. And so what I get is team members coming forward all the time. I got another group to use the assessment platform. And so the assessment platform is the way that we count that. And that's an updated goal. It was 100,000 people when we had 0. I just walked in and said, we're doing this. And we got it done. And now it will be 1 million. And then values, we have values, and the values are defined, and that's how we behave. And we have a values moment every Monday. Monday meetings, what are we doing this week? What are your objectives? But can you think back to last week and recognize somebody for living some of the values that we have? Again, we have them very carefully defined. I'm not going to walk you through all of them. It'll be boring for you probably. But so I don't have to post them on walls and have people ignore them. Like, it's integrated into what we do. And I've done several values workshops with teams, and I absolutely love it. And the conversations that they have really push people to talk about what's actually important. So it's cool. So I recommend it. The way you do it is you just go out and download some values cards, and then you have people do a sorting activity. It's actually really easy. So back to Hackman's book, to build a strong direction and purpose, you want to make sure you have 3 features, and that aligns with different functions and different benefits. So it's got to be something challenging, like we're climbing that mountain, and that mountain looks like a really high mountain, and this is a huge, how will we ever do this, but that seems really exciting, so that energizes and inspires and then motivates people. It's got to be clear, not ambiguous, so be specific. That orients attention onto a specific thing and aligns people's work. And then it's got to be empowering. The whole idea is that they're the ones who really are going to get you there. You're helping them do it. And so you want to then, that engages their talents and it fosters their skill utilization. People want to do work they're good at. They want to contribute. You just have to allow them to do it. So for homework, email me if you do this. I'd love to hear how it goes. Share your direction and purpose for your team with a partner. Or go meet somebody for coffee. Is it challenging? Is it clear? Is it empowering? Ask them for some feedback. How could it be improved? And then make sure your team understands that. If we had time, we'd be doing a breakout right now, but we're not doing that. Okay, so you have the direction and purpose. You're going to need trust to get to the healthy disagreement. So high trust, low trust teams. I'm sure you've experienced both in high trust teams, and you can think about this, by the way, the team trusting itself or the team trusting you as a leader, which is interesting to think about. So are people willing to be vulnerable? Do they feel safe to speak up? Do they seek input from other people? Is it okay to experiment? And do people admit mistakes? In low trust teams, or if they don't trust you, they'll feel you're out to get them, or they'll be scared to ask questions. They'll avoid getting feedback, and people generally avoid people they don't trust and have relationship conflict with anyway. That's the typical reaction. People will play it too safe, you don't learn, and deny mistakes, and it just turns into a blame game. All right, so obviously we need trust. And in fact, the assumed advantage of teamwork is that the group of experts will come together, interact, share different areas of expertise, and make the best decisions. That's just the working assumption that we have. In the absence of trust, you get things like groupthink, which has been attributed to all kinds of terrible, horrible decisions. And you have a group of well-intentioned people together, but for some reason they make illogical decisions. So the Space Shuttle Challenger in 1986, they blamed groupthink processes on this. Essentially, engineers felt that it wouldn't be safe probably to launch because it was too cold. It was like 20 degrees colder. It was in January. It was 20 degrees colder than it should be, and they just didn't have clear data on whether or not these O-ring seals would actually seal at that temperature. And then management was saying, we have a lot of pressure to launch. We've been talking this up for a very, very long time. We've had a lot of canceled launches in the past. It was like there was no real option not to launch in their minds. And so they said, and they also said, you don't actually have data that it won't work. It's just, you essentially have theory that it won't work based on the best data that you have. So can you go back, rethink it, and come back? And they rethunk it and came back and said, we don't have any concerns. And sure enough, that's what happened. So what you want to watch for are some of the features of groupthink. It's self-censorship. So essentially people aren't speaking up when they do have things to share. are illusions of unanimity. So this is everybody nodding back at you, but you're not hearing anything. All right, you think that's a good sign, but it's not. And then there's pressure to conform. There's other ones as well, but these are the key ones to pay attention to. If we have that, we're not going to get the assumed advantages of teamwork. And I really like this quote from Patrick Lencioni, who's not a researcher, but still made a really good point. When there is trust, conflict becomes nothing but the pursuit of truth. If you disagree with somebody, but you completely trust them, it's almost a matter of curiosity. Like, why, where would you be coming from with that? What led you to believe that? What's the evidence for that? Maybe that will challenge you to think a little bit differently, and who knows where that goes. But you have to have trust to do it. So if you want to build trust, one thing would be to make sure you have those conditions for teamwork already set up that we discussed, and others. Another one would be to look at yourself. What is it that, as a leader, you're role modeling? Because really, your direct reports are very attentive to how you behave and how you make decisions. And you can say what you want, but your behavior is what you signal that you value. And then that's what they know you value, and then they're going to go along with that. So you are a role model, and are you behaving in a way that's accountable and generates trust? And are you fair, and are you transparent? Do people know why decisions are made? Do you share information coming down, or do you only share it with your favorites? I went into work with one team. The leader actually brought, he would bring along 2 other guys into the meeting. And I'm like, why are these team members here? And it was clear that they were just his favorite. They had no reason to be there, but he just liked them. And so then they were privy to this extra information. And I'm like, I think I know what your problem is already. I think we need to do an assessment here. Anyway. And then you deal with it directly. All right, if they're trusted, there are issues with increased communication. I love David Goggins. How you address it is you face it. So you deal with it, right? Our reaction is to avoid. So there's formal things you can do. You can have team interventions where you can have someone like me come in and do an assessment. We can start talking about what's working, what's not, why, try to create an open environment. You can do informal things, getting people together and to spend time together and actually remember they're humans and know that they have a life and maybe kids and this and that creates empathy, and it could start to rebuild the trust. And if you have to, you could go to mediation, but that's, no one wants to do that. Okay, so if you've got direction and purpose and you have trust, then you've paved the way to have constructive conflict and healthy disagreement, and then hopefully come up with things you never would have imagined happening in the past. So there's 2 things: creating the climate for that, some of the suggestions I have for you, and then specific techniques. So a concept called reflexivity has a huge amount of support in the literature. It's basically having teams reflect, and something like a post-mortem, after-action reports that are commonly done in some fields, but not done nearly enough in management and organizations in general, are reviewing what worked and what didn't work, and what can we learn and what can we implement next time to make things better. So I'm just calling it a post-mortem here. There's a pre-mortem, which would be, before we go down this path, let's imagine it didn't work. Why would that be? And put it out there to the team. Let's just brainstorm that for 5 minutes and see if anything big comes up. Making conflict a duty and an expectation. You expect people to speak up when they see an issue. And so one simple way is just making the point of, I'd like to see some devil's advocacy today. It doesn't mean someone has to be a devil's advocate specifically, but just anyone can play that role, and they're welcome to. They do things like that in surgeries, for example. They write things on the wall like, I am the surgeon, but I don't know everything. Because people are terrified to speak up, and they'll literally watch them cut the wrong leg. It happens, right? You have to cut this one or whatever if you go in. It happens. Maybe that's more Canadian, I don't know. Your healthcare might be better. Recognizing attempts and appreciating people. So effective facilitation is a critical tool for any leader, right? To sort of be able to step back, recognize the group processes that are going on. And facilitation is really not that difficult. I basically read a book and then practiced, and I'm probably not as good as a professional, but you can get the basics really easily. And then setting up the structures and the norms. So a training intervention that I've validated in my lab is called SUIT. And it stands for sharing, understanding, integrating, and having, adopting a team decision. And within that are a bunch of different steps and protocols that you can follow to sort of optimize the information flow within the team and information exchange, because there are a lot of different biases that come up in group discussions. Even as simple as during the share phase, a lot of times the most extroverted person will just speak up first. Now we spend an hour debating the merits of that one idea when we could have just had silent brainstorming for 2 minutes and had 20 ideas to choose from. So there's really simple things you can implement, and the evidence is clear that it works. So let me ask you for the other bit of homework. You can take this back to your team, but also think about your current team now, some team that you're in, and we can do a pulse check. And you can do this with your teams. We're going to do a pulse check today on our constructive conflict, or we're going to do it on our psychological safety. What is the current trust level in your team right now? And it's from 0 to 10, all right? And on the count of 3, people actually hold up their hands and say what they think it is. And I've done this in all kinds of teams facilitation. And believe it or not, people will actually be like, they do say the truth, because sometimes it's very low, shockingly low. You're like, this is unbelievable. So think about your team. What would you say the level of trust is today? Ready? 1, 2, 3. 8. Right? 10. Wait. Yeah. So pretty much the full range, I would say. There's some low ones out there, and we can talk after. But use that with your team, and then say, hey, if you've got some ideas about how we can make some improvements, bring them forward to me. I want to be open and honest and face things, not brush it under the rug and pretend it's not there. ITPmetrics.com if you're interested, and if you email me, it's my top priority, so I'll get back to you right away. I don't make any money off this. This isn't about commercialization. It's been around since 2014. Again, this is my way to try to create value for communities and organizations by virtue of having received grants. I've also been able to do some research through it, as you might expect, but the vast majority of it, there's no research being done. There's about 230,000 assessments worldwide taken, most of them actually in post-secondary, but they're just as applicable to any industry, and I think it's useful. So there's the takeaways. Building a high-performance team will create engagement. There is a roadmap to teamwork, and there's more than what I showed you. You can do this. It takes effort. It's not like you do it in one day. It's a constant part of your job as a leader. You can inspire people with challenging, clear, and empowering directions and purpose, and then if you can address trust issues, you can promote healthy disagreement. All right, so some of the support I've had, and especially the Haydn Williams Research Funding and Fellowship. Again, Marilyn Gagne, thank you so much for hosting me and taking such good care of me here in Perth. And thank you very much.
Yes. So, yes, thank you very much, Tom, for that. And now we have a period of time. I'm just checking. I actually think, yeah, it does say 7:02 he was supposed to finish. Yeah. No pressure. So once again, thank you for that, and it's very interesting. Now I'm going to open the floor to questions from the audience. I do hope people will ask questions. The only the position is that just say who you are and where you're from, and we do have a microphone roaming, and so we have a question straight up. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Justin Davies from Imagination. Thank you for a terrific talk. Really enjoyed that. Have you found any difference culturally in terms of different countries and their impact in terms of teamwork, and what experience have you seen in that area? Thank you.
Yeah, the database is growing with different cultures taking the assessments, but we haven't studied it directly. You know, the more diversity on the team, you know, the more that you just have to figure out how to work together, because you come to the table with a different set of assumptions and so forth. So, but on the other hand, it can challenge your assumptions in a way that makes you rethink things and realize maybe the way you've been doing it wasn't ideal, or maybe it was, but it pushes you to rethink. So, not sure what the latest evidence would say. Yeah, I wouldn't do it for the sake of doing it. I would do it because it makes sense for business reasons.
Okay, thank you. Right here, thank you.
I'm interested in whether or not, when you think about project teams and thinking about this glorious idea of agile project teams and waterfall project teams, and whether or not you've found or you've heard that there's any difference in one working better than another.
Agile versus the waterfall?
Yep.
I don't know about waterfall teams.
So waterfall is that a project, rather than it being iterative, it follows like a waterfall. You finish a bit and then you start again, and then whereas agile is generally kind of circular, iterative, those sorts of things.
Yeah, I don't know. So one of the boundary conditions on my research and my talk is I'm talking about really conventional teams, stable membership, bounded. They exist for a reason that lasts a reasonable amount of time. And so agile teams, for example, I think can be very fast-acting, rapid-forming, rapid disbanding. It's really more similar to like collaborative problem-solving to me, which is, a lot of the same principles would apply, but maybe just not one-to-one.
Okay, thank you. I know you want to ask a question. Yes, right here, thank you.
Thank you. I'm Roberto from Curtin. Fantastic presentation, except for the part on Calgary. I actually really miss the winters there due to this.
Okay.
But
place.
kind of following on the questions about different types of organizations, do you account for different types of organizations, for example, a profit seeker, a very efficient company in the private sector compared, say, with government agencies or universities or organizations where positions are fixed, they have to be filled, something you wouldn't see in the private sector where it's very much based on reducing costs and improving efficiency and so on.
Yeah, no, it's a good, I mean, they face just different sets of challenges, but the principles stay the same. You know, it's just that the nature of the challenge, the particular principle is harder to enact in one environment or another. I mean, because I've worked with the teams in the universities, nonprofit and for-profit. The university teams have a really tough time, you know, because the staff is the staff usually. You know, if it was my wife, she'd be like, well, they'd be performance managed out of the company. That doesn't really happen, at least in my university climate. So, but that could be a good thing, because that's an opportunity to try to figure out like what's going on with this person, how do I get the most out of them. You still have to try to do the same things. It's just the challenges just vary depending on the environment.
Okay, at the back there.
Thanks. Hello, it's Tasneem from Curtin. I was just wondering, what do you consider to be your most exciting project that you're working on right now? What excites you about teamwork and how we can improve it?
Well, Mary Lynn's in the room, so I probably have to talk about our project. Well, that is a really cool project, and so hasn't been looked at really in the past is how people have their basic fundamental needs satisfied in a team environment. We know that for people to self-actualize and experience motivation that is productive and healthy for them, hopefully I'm getting this right, then they need to have fundamental needs satisfied. They need to have the need for competence satisfied, the need for autonomy satisfied, and the need for relatedness. And to me, I mean, being a teams person, one of the most obvious places to have your needs satisfied would be by the other people in your immediate proximity, i.e. your team. So what we've developed is a theory of how that works, and we've applied for funding to support that research, and we hope that we'll be able to then use the implications to work with organizations to make the people much more need fulfilled, and therefore the teams motivated from a healthy standpoint rather than a controlled standpoint, which should increase their effectiveness and make people a heck of a lot happier and healthier physically as well.
Is the question still alive?
Hi, I'm Jo Clark. I'm from Landgate, which is a public sector agency. What's your most surprising finding? You know, you saw something on the surface and then you found the data and thought, well, that shouldn't work, or that should have matched up better. What was the biggest surprise?
The most surprising finding? Well, it was nothing I ever published, so that's where my mind usually goes, is what we published. But that finding that the leaders were pretty out of touch with, so if you correlate the leader's view of the team's health with the team's view of the team's health, you get a really high correlation, so you think they see it the same way. But it wasn't until I was playing around with some visualization that I immediately saw it. Like the black line wasn't there or anything. It was the kind of like a revelation, and I was like, the leaders don't know. And the thing and that's an exaggeration. Obviously they do, and some are better than others, but just generally. And then, but usually the stakeholder, I wasn't coming in from like top management working with these teams because I haven't wanted to do that yet. It's more word of mouth, and we've worked with them in a free capacity just to build my student skills. So the leader was our stakeholder. So it's a very tricky situation. I probably haven't told them as much as I should because you're trying to keep them happy. But some of them, that leader, the team where they were crying, I mean, that was a case where they actually did agree. The leader and the team agreed things were bad. It turned out that it was just a toxic leader, because I got to know the team members for some time as like professional contacts, and the leader was bullying them and harassing them and creating this awful environment, but he was a very charismatic person. So I had no clue, I had no way to know this, and they had no way to tell me. This keeps me up at night at times to think that could be happening a lot. And the people don't have a easy way out of that, because it's not like you can just skip your immediate supervisor and start going higher. I mean, you can't do that in most organizations. So there's way too much of that going on.
Hi, yeah, thanks. It's been really interesting. My name's Leander, and I'm from Equal Disability Consultants. I'm just wondering, in sort of the research that you've done, whether you've found that there's any sort of pros and cons to having leaders within teams, as in the team either choosing or having someone nominated, in terms of their effectiveness?
So you mean like a team lead instead of...
Yeah, often a team will sort of say, oh, shall we have a leader, and want to sort of nominate someone as a leader?
Depends on the team. And Amy Tian can tell you all about like emergent leadership, because she sent me in Teams, because she sent me this paper that I've only skimmed so far. But I think there's no one way to design the team to make sure that it's going to be effective. And there's a whole stream of literature on shared leadership, and so we divvy up leadership roles into people who can do that role the best, and we don't need really it to be consolidated within one person. In other cases, it's more hierarchical and is more consolidated. I use team leads all the time in my team because it makes communication a little easier. I know who is the point person, basically. I find that without that it can be confusing, but I don't think there's one way to do it.
Hi, thank you very much for your presentation. My name is Lorna Rikiki. I work for Monadelphous, which is an engineering and maintenance provider within Australia predominantly. My question is in relation to virtual teams and what you've found in relation to some of the key challenges that a virtual team faces, particularly in a workforce of the future, flexibility at work. You know, we're really moving to an environment where we have to be very open-minded to virtual teams to attract key talent, for example. So yeah, I suppose my question is around some of the key challenges that you've seen through your research with virtual teams and how to overcome those.
Yeah, I did my honors thesis on virtual team effectiveness and personality styles. So I've been involved with that for 17 years, 18 years. So there's well over 1,000 research papers on the topic. It's hard to distill down at times. The challenges are really clear, like if you Google it, and they're very obvious. Getting over the challenges is not obvious in a lot of cases. A lot of companies will try to sell you solutions that sound too good to be true. They probably are. So it comes back to the conditions that I talked about before. And that's what J.R. Hackman put in his book. I was like, where's virtual teams in here? And there's one page, and he just said, conditions are the same that you still have to put into place, but it's much, much harder to do it. Virtual teams almost always underperform compared to face-to-face teams. Although over time, if you give them enough time and people work hard at it, they can do as well. It's a bit of a minefield, but it's the reality of our future, right? We have to be able to do it. There's no real bullet. There are taxonomies of like basically competencies for people who to identify people who fit well in that kind of environment, for example. But it's very hard because we're not evolved to communicate through machines all the time, and 70% or so of communication is probably nonverbal. Like, have you ever watched a movie without volume? Sometimes I do that on planes, and I'm like, I think I pretty much know what this movie's about. This is weird. You don't get those nonverbals in a virtual environment, so there's no magic bullet that I have found or seen anywhere, and I've been a lot of places looking for that.
So I'll jump in with a question, although there was one here. Along that taxonomy, I was on a board of the CRC for living with autism and talking about diversity, not just in gender, but also in neurotypical thought processes. How do you think leaders can receive that message to look at a diversity within their team? What are some of the pointers?
Well, gender diversity is one of the most interesting ones because there's some emerging findings. There's a paper published in a journal called Science, probably the second best, most prolific journal there is, in 2010. And what they found was that the greater the proportion of women in the team, the higher the collective intelligence, the higher performance of the team, and that this was because that women were more effective at this test, which is called something like reading the mind through the eyes. And what the test is, of course, this is like psych stuff, right? Psychology stuff. You just see a picture of the eyes. You have to rate them on a number of different emotions and moods that the person might be experiencing. How likely is it that they're sad? How likely it is that they're happy? Women are on average, better than that. And so that sort of mediated the effect. And so more recently, and that's like MIT research. So more recently, we found some of those same trends in our own data. It seems to be that women may have an advantage when it comes to the softer social skills. Where they're getting underappreciated is in the STEM fields. There's a huge problem where they, for whatever reason, cultural or whatever, don't feel much confidence working in those environments, and I think that kind of makes it really difficult for them to move forward and then do as well as men. So there's a whole ton of issues wrapped up in that, but there's some really interesting actual science on it.
Fantastic. There was a question, yes. Oh. Someone just stopped you in, yes.
Oh, thank you. That was a fantastic speech and presentation, Tom. Thank you. My name's Claire Sweeney. I work at Woodside Energy. I was really, my question was actually very similar to Lorna's, so I think you've addressed that one. It was around the geographically dispersed nature of teams and whether proximity played a factor in team effectiveness. But I did have a second one, which was when you look at criteria for effective team performance, have you done any studies looking at teams that hand over to other teams and cross-team collaboration, where there's a broader interdependency that needs to play out?
Multi-team systems is what people refer to it in our literature as. There's an emerging literature on that, surprisingly little. There's a good book called 3D Team Leadership. 3D has to do with leading individuals, leading teams that are connected and leading individual teams. So you have to think about the three levels. Right now I have a qualitative study where we're interviewing leaders in large infrastructure project type organizations, construction organizations, because these projects are always multi-team system in design. And there's critical interdependencies between the teams. So usually the way they try to manage that is through an integration team at the top. So essentially team leads or groups of leaders try to coordinate everything. So the effectiveness of the coordination of the teams is more important than the health of the individual teams. That's been one of the findings that people have said. That's not something I saw. I found in my own data. What we were finding is that rather than the task and constructive debates kind of healthy disagreement conflict, which is normally the one that is good and you want to pursue, it's something else, kind of like the forgotten third one, which is process conflict. And if that integration team is having conflict about how the work should be coordinated and done, then it tends to be an unsuccessful project. I mean, it's not rocket science, it makes sense, but it's something that we haven't seen in the individual component teams so far.
At the back.
Hi, my name's Carmen Langley. I'm from Chubb Insurance. I'm interested in the follow-up to your research. So those teams that had a low trust factor or low performance, in terms of engaging and improving that culture, was it possible without a significant change in the personnel within the team?
Well, I mean, that's definitely one way to go, is to get rid of, if you have a toxic team member, and it really does only take one person to start having people close their doors and sort of not want to risk going out and not appear as active on their whatever Microsoft Teams app that they use to communicate. It depends. If you had all toxic people, I don't know what you would do. If you have one or two, you need to try to work with them to get them up to speed and be honest with them. And I think that part of that is part of the problem, is that they don't get honest feedback. And some people just don't know how they're coming across. And in fact, they think they're wonderful. You know, it's very difficult to deliver that kind of information to somebody and not completely demoralize them. So that's why I had that once in our team, and it was horrible. And the way that it ended was the person eventually left, but it took about 4 months for it to all unfold. And the whole time, everybody was walking on eggshells, and actually some people were more loyal to that other person, which is crazy. And yeah, so the other thing I was just going to say is can the leader handle it, and does the leader have to be replaced? It's like the coach and the sports team, and that might be an option as well. Not first resort, last resort, but.
Hi, thank you for the talk. I found it really helpful. My name's Yara Morris from PwC. I had a question on the roadmap that you went through as you're dealing with larger teams. How have you found that possible in terms of trying to create that trust with a larger group? And is that possible with a larger group, or it's really the smaller groups within it that ultimately create that?
How big is a large group?
150?
Oh, yeah, no. Yeah, well, generally I don't work with groups that big. We can do some basic, I mean, a mission and vision can still be relevant at their level, and because they belong to a unit probably that's collectively working towards something, I'm assuming. But they don't have the interdependencies that define a team the way that I'm talking about it today. So a lot of these principles are relevant only when you're working interdependently with a stable group of people and a bounded team. Usually it's like 8 to 12 people.
There you go. Okay. I'll ask one more question, unless there's one from the floor. So, yes, saved by the hand. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. That was very interesting. I'm Barbara. I'm from Curtin. I teach the MBA students, so I'd like to pass on our international students some of what we talked about today. But I'm just wondering if your data captures some of the key competencies from the leaders that you are studying. And more specifically, there's a couple of us here that have just been accredited in emotional intelligence. What role do you think that plays?
Yeah, I don't know about the competency frameworks. That's a good one. There's probably a million out there. I don't know about validated ones. The typical approach that people take in the scientific literature is called the functional view, which is essentially the leader's job is to do what the team needs to be successful. And so we look at, things like I talked about that go into high-performance teamwork, and then how do you enable the processes that they need to succeed. So what specific competencies, it's usually, we don't usually take that approach, I guess. Emotional intelligence, so yeah, the social sensitivity thing, the test I talked about, reading the mind's eye, that's effectively a part of emotional intelligence, as you probably know. And yeah, I mean, that's absolutely critical, because you've got to sense if there are issues and dysfunctions within the team that aren't obviously present, right? I think emotional intelligence, or social sensitivity, or there's different terms. Some of them are sort of loaded terms, I guess. Is definitely one of the big ones. And I don't have an emotional intelligence or similar test on my platform, but for this reason, because a number of MBA directors and exec MBA directors have been asking me to put it on. I'm probably going to have to, but that means validating a whole test and doing it properly, which takes time. Yes, critical.
Okay, well, thank you. I've got one question. It's a yes/no answer. Does the team management of an elite sports club represent the same parameters as elite teamwork in industry and non-profits?
It depends.
It depends. I'll leave it with that. I'll leave it with that. Someone did point out whether Tom was consciously aware that he was wearing a tie that's very close to the Fremantle Dockers, but I can confirm that it isn't for those Eagle supporters. But Curtin does have an affiliation with the Fremantle Dockers, so it was a bit of a coincidence that I'd like to say that was a good thing. So on behalf of Curtin University, I'd like to thank Tom for his engaging lecture. So give me a round of applause. Thank you. I wish him very excellent. Yes, I wish him every further success for his future research and the collaborations between Calgary and himself and individuals in Fowey and Curtin and others. So thank you for your participation in this wonderful gathering, and I'd like to demonstrate some of our appreciation. I did break this, I apologise.
That's okay.
However, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you. So this concludes the evening. Thank you to all for attending, and please wish you a safe and wonderful journey home. Thank you. Well done.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Fantastic. Yeah, really good work. Yeah, really great.
Thank you, guys. Really good.
Yeah. Oh, right.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah.
Well done. Oh, thank you. Yeah, all good. So getting access to the recording, do we get a link? Or how does it
So what you'll need to do is just send an email to my undergrad.
Maybe once when I first started, but
I can grab the email and I'll email it to you.
Perfect.
So I'll do that. So you just need to email them. Just like, if you're a member, recall the details.
That's like 5 minutes long.
You can just send them through.
Yep, that's fine.
Just say, can you grab
Yep. Perfect. Awesome. Thanks for being around. We always find that anything actually goes one way if you weren't
Yeah,
sure something will happen. So thank you very much for that. Pretty much. Yeah, we'll kind of close those off. Thank you for that. Awesome. Thanks, Jamie.
Thanks for coming.
My only question is, because this is too many questions.
Well, look up Amy and look up the Amy stuff. She was the safety. She's got a couple of books. Her whole, she's worked in healthcare exclusively on these principles. And a lot of them are just rapid learning expanding kinds of tools. She calls it teaming. One of those teaming extreme teams. And healthcare is one of the big ones that she works in. So books are very good. But I've done work in healthcare too. I feel like I can make a difference. Like it's just like it's so. Yeah, of course. Well, not all positions believe that. Right. Yeah, I mean, it's worth pursuing. I'm just saying it's so complicated that I felt like unless I dedicate myself just to this.
Well, that's, I mean, I wanted to ask a question. I have a million in my head. I guess I don't even know the question, let alone.
team together with a bunch of faulty parts. Is there a way that it would run well? It just would be hard. Yeah, the peer feedback or the well, I've had some like the trust level stuff can't do. Like we were going to pull out, people came back and like there's no way we can write each other.
Yeah, we were describing this.
But yeah, so but there's some other ones. Starting with like the styles. If you go on there, you'll see. Yeah, it's just what you can do is maybe, yeah. So if you start, if you've already done the lighter ones, then yeah, you're ready. If not, you have to like start and to trust you. Yeah. Yeah. It's gonna be a tough. That's gonna be a tough environment. It's weird. I haven't really seen. Yeah. Well, there are some sections of sound like how you reset the team, for example. These are weird I can't quite remember. It's 2 editions. It's written by practitioners. I know it has a section.
We can email you.
If you do email me, I'll definitely remember it.
Can we do that your name and we'll find your email?
Yeah, I don't know if I brought some. I thought I brought some cards, but no, I don't have it. But it should be easy enough to find. Yeah, and I mean, I'm happy to send along resources and give you my thoughts on whatever. This is important stuff to do. And I mean, you know, Edmonton, so Alberta.
I was going to say cold weather.
I grew up cheering for them, but now I grew up in Red Deer.
Oh.
I don't go back. My family's still
We've got pictures of our kids.
It's in Red Deer. The 10 months old. That big teapot.
Thanks.
Nice to meet you, Karen.
Cheers.
I've never heard of that, but I'm sure that exists. Yeah, it's super bizarre.
Well, I think well, I sometimes I really, well, I like to watch now. More about that because it's fascinating. I think it has something to do with the nature of the personalities attracted to that job. Because it's a role that requires critical thinking. And more I observe people who prefer nature as well, the more I actually choose good times.
That's just where they live their life. Well, we all know people like that. I've just never seen them.
In a whole group?
Yeah.
Oh, let me, how long are you here? How long are you here? When you go back?
Monday night.
Oh, well, this is lucky because otherwise you could go back and meet them any time. They are hilarious. Oh, in fact, me and I have thrown on a few dinner.
What is the function?
So they issue guidance to by the Commission for the state. Valuations, so it is a very tricky the nature of it is to tax elements and decision together. I think our approach to the
Well, that's a good story because I haven't heard that one before. But now it'll be like stuck in my mind. Yeah, I hope so. this isn't really my research. Here's mine's a little bit. Well, right now, my students largely, it's kind of what they're interested in with respect to teaming, because I have some students now that like my area has always been the conflict and conflict management, but there's not like a huge, I keep publishing little things. It's a pretty solid business. I've got a student thriving. We have needs. Well, so this is one of the projects, but there's oh yeah. It's a little bit of a different take than psychology. Still quite old, like 40 years ago. That's what we're So are you able to follow up somehow with them, like say share something? Maybe my slides. But
well, we have the list of invites.
Yeah, exactly.
So I assume that you would probably have access to that email system.
It would be all the people who registered, even though not everyone turned up.
Right.
So we will probably have, so I'm pretty sure that you will have that.
That should be useful. Right.
I assume that they will follow up with a short survey or something of like their appreciation and feedback. I'm pretty sure they will do that. So I'll try to find out if they collect that information soon. That feedback.
Yeah, sure. No, that'd be great. But also just for like your business development, right?
Yeah.
So this is actually a good way to get like potentially business professionals engaged.
Yeah, exactly.
How many people
That's what
tonight?
It was pretty full after about a year. Yeah.
Half full?
Yeah. And it's, there's 100. There was they had 100 kids.
About 17 to 4?
Yeah. Which is pretty good because like when it's free events, you know that everyone's gonna show up. You don't have like a USB key or anything.
No, I think I got it. Yeah.
I'm gonna use this. I'm getting paranoid.
Oh.
Did you buy your toilet
Yeah,
paper?
that's actually a good.
No. Did you see the news? Here? You cannot find toilet paper anywhere.
Oh, yeah, I heard about that.
Well,
And sanitizer, apparently, like you can find
because
sanitizer.
you might have to go to self-isolation.
For 2
worried
weeks.
about, there was a lot about
Yeah.
the supply chain because the drugs were being made in China, get here, and issue there.
So people thought the number one worry would be
Toilet paper.
toilet paper.
So
That's
like,
interesting.
There's memes online of
That's
people
what I
like,
thought.
wrapping themselves in toilet paper.
Just here, boys.
No, because I spoke to Stacey Parker today and she said it's the same thing in Queensland right now. There's no toilet paper.
It's
There's like
starting
a national shortage of toilet paper because people just went in the stores and just bought all the toilet paper. But now there's people selling